Hello and welcome to Agency Office Hours for November 2024. I'm Agency Advisor Karl Sakas, and here's a preview of the questions that we'll be covering today. First up, we have a fireside chat with David Ledge Ledgerwood about enterprise clients, how to get them, and importantly, how to prepare your agency for when you actually land them. Then, I'll share a new way to see how your agency compares to other agencies, including some instant benchmarking options to see how your agency compares specifically about agency-client collaboration. Then, Stuart has a question about exit planning, specifically, how do you know when you're ready to sell? Finally, we have a question from John around how to grow your client count, how to add more clients without breaking the agency. And I'll share a bit more about a particular solution, which is a pod structure, which is increasingly popular at independent agencies. All right. If you have a question you'd like to ask at a future event, please include that when you RSVP. We have the upcoming dates available at the Sakes and Company website. You can RSVP free of charge. If you have a question, include it when you sign up. We'll let you know ahead of time if you're on the list. And as usual, you can also just listen in and hear what other people are asking. As a reminder, don't share anything out loud that you don't want to become public because this will be the video. And if you're watching the video, well, you've already got that right away. All right. Coming up first, we have Ledge. Ledge, let me go ahead and put you on spotlight. Here we go. Ledge, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
Carl, it's great to be here. Longtime fan, first time caller. So,
Awesome, awesome. Well, great to have you here. In our fireside chat, one of the things that, as we were talking about potential topics, the idea of big clients came up. Big logo clients, enterprise clients, Fortune 500, however you think of them, bigger than a lot of agencies are working with today. And you have some great advice. So let's dig in. For people who aren't familiar with you already, with your work, please introduce yourself.
absolutely. So, all my friends call me Ledge. David Ledgerwood is my real name, but sometimes I don't even turn around when people say my name. Um, I have been, I guess, the serial entrepreneur, largely in B2B services for the last 20 some odd years, and I've worked across a lot of different agencies, often in the sales seat, and learned and picked up a lot of things about how and where we could first, I was excited about winning deals from big logos. Every that's where that word sort of comes from. That's a sales word. People want to score me some logos, get those logos on the site. And I quickly learned from that experience that you could sell an agency out of business real fast. And so agencies and consultancies and professional services are kind of my area. And I became very interested in this topic on the third go around of closing, one of those knock it out logos for the first time, particularly for businesses that were transitioning from largely, sort of MRR based, retainer based type of SMB clients. And the discoveries and kind of research, around that became kind of this body of work. So, what in fact is a big logo deal, not just from, hey, let's close it, but how do I think of how to survive and thrive? Because really the value of that logo on the site becomes the opportunity that drives a lot more of those opportunities. So it's that next level social proof.
Makes sense. Well, and maybe just to get everyone on the same page, because I know you focused on this the past 5 years in particular, how do you define a big logo client?
Yeah, so it's interesting because it has some overlap with enterprise, but not necessarily enterprise. And I think of big logo as household name, wow factor. Sure, it's a big company. People have all heard of it. For example, AWS, Meta, Siemens. Like, yes, these are all enterprise customers. But the flip side, you can also have, and I would not recommend these be your first targets. I mean, it happens all the time where I'll get an inbound lead of like never heard of this thing at all, and it's a $30 billion company,
Mm.
right? So that's enterprise, but it doesn't make any difference if that logo is on the site because I'm a nerd and I never heard of it. right? So what we're looking for when I think of a big logo is the cachet of the name in addition to the size.
Got it. So ultimately, there's an impressiveness where other clients assume, or prospective clients, well, if you work with them, we want to work with them as
That
well.
is the sentence that you want to complete. Yeah. It's just like, wow, they work with these guys, therefore they can handle me.
Got it. That makes sense. I know my grandfather in his business consulting, on top of his being a business professor for 40 some years, would work with really big clients like GE and
Right.
Nestle and Caterpillar and others, but he also worked with smaller businesses too. But the fact that he worked with GE and like taught in their corporate training program helped get the smaller firms as well.
It's logo dropping. Yeah, there's no question. Yeah, I mean that's what you want to happen. I mean, there's how many companies out there are $100 million companies that can pay your agency bills and you'll be real happy with, and nobody's heard of it. So that's the difference between if you're trying to go to this level, that's what we're trying to look to do is get those marquee names. So yeah.
That makes sense. So, agencies certainly in my work often want bigger and better clients. And sometimes they see those as sort of the holy grail. Like if we get such and such, we've got it made. But in my experience, it doesn't always go smoothly. And I know looking ahead, you've created a discount for listeners to help dig deeper on this. But at a high level, what is different about big logo clients versus those small and medium businesses that many agencies work with now?
So it turns out to be a lot on the side of, yeah, I mean, sure, you want to be able to have quality marketing, sort of great funnel experience, personalized presentations, the whole thing. People focus a lot on that pre-sale
Mhm.
idea. I would say 80% or more of what you ought to be focused on is the post-sale. How will I deliver this? And the number one thing I've seen, I mean, you literally can go out of business. These are bet the company deals because you can't finance it. And
Mm,
so I go into great, great detail in that. Like you need 6 months of cash in the bank in order to even really look at dealing with some of these enterprise things now, and even more so in the last few years. You're talking about they're going to pay you net 90, and they're going to expect a great deal of work. You're going to have to pull people off of all kinds of other projects. You're paying the bills based on your MRR from your stable, nice, unknown SMB clients. That's your cash flow. Do you have the staffing infrastructure to be able to staff these things and not drop the ball on everybody else? Then you have to deal with all kinds of quality assurance and legal and procurement and delivery and billing, and it just goes on and on and on. So what I came to understand is none of what you have ought to be assumed to work in this scenario. You are building an entire copy of your thing. Your expertise, the quality of work, the thing, the 20% that you do is what they bought. You
mm,
don't have the 80% to deal with this yet. You need to be ready to do so, because if you don't get the success on one of these, they fire you and they could even charge you a whole lot of money and put you out of business. So, it's the danger zone of saying, yeah, you want that. And here's how to get ready for that in the 80% sense, right?
well, let's dig in on that. So, when it comes to those big logo clients, how do they typically impact things like cash flow management, resource allocation, and project governance? What are some things that people should be thinking about?
Yeah, yeah. I want everybody to, again, to pay attention to just the cash flow outlays, particularly if you've gotten yourself used to or dependent upon, the first of the month, we charge all our clients a $5,000 or $6,000 retainer. It all hits the bank, payroll's paid for, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, now you're going to have people for whom they're working on that project and the ladder keeps getting longer
Mm,
because you can't even send the invoice until the end of period X, having delivered some things. And then you're talking about net 45, 60, 90. Big companies pay slow.
yeah.
And somebody needs to be paying attention to just that. Whereas you used to program, let's say, into Stripe, your subscription, and it runs every month. It's cool. It hits credit card. Now we're talking about procurement. When a lot of these companies are going to have these relatively awful procurement portals, like, websites from 1996
Hmm.
that you need to go in and log in and put all your details, and it goes to some unknown place, and there's no real connection between the people you're doing things for and the people who pay bills, right?
Yeah. I mean, I've
So,
dealt with some of those procurement teams in the past, and I mean, their job is to save the company money. And
and you drag it out. I mean, I don't know if it's like an insurance company sort of thing or what, but it's like they're just not motivated to pay that bill.
yeah,
And so you have to learn the whole nuances of that. Now, then from a staffing perspective, again, it's like I don't presume that agencies have 5 or 6 people just sitting around on the bench with nothing to do, waiting for that big client to book.
yeah,
And even if you did have that, that means maybe you're not billing enough to have that cash flow buffer in
yeah,
order to, it's like these are not the kinds of deals where you kind of say, oh, if it would be great if I just got this $250,000 deal, everything would be fine. No, everything will be a lot worse. Like under good circumstances,
but
these can bankrupt you,
yeah.
right?
I mean, also, especially if say that client, some clients, I have cases where, I work with agencies where some of their enterprise clients prepay. They'll like prepay a year or
Yeah.
6 months in advance, but importantly, that money is not yours to spend. Like set
Yeah.
aside.
That's a whole other thing. I've seen the flip side of that. It's great. We just got 200 grand in the bank, but that's called deferred revenue.
Yes.
And a lot of folks in the creative and agency space haven't been raised as accountants.
Hmm.
So you need to really understand that the fact, like, that's not your money.
No.
Some portion of that is your money. So,
Right. What about resource allocation? For instance, I have a client that has enterprise clients, big logo. They're enterprise and big logo.
yes.
And there was one point where one of their clients wanted to increase their spend. The agency had about 40 people. If the new deals went ahead, the agency would need to hire like 20 people in just a
Right.
couple months. And they started laying the groundwork and all, but what are your tips around resource management and allocation?
Yeah. I think, and this is where it becomes a whole sort of team experience in my mind. It's just like, all right, y'all, we are going to go ahead and do this new thing. We know it's going to be a lot, and there's a reasonable chance that all of us, for a short period of time, are going to run at 120% capacity.
Mhm.
Why? Because we can't spend the money ahead of revenue to hire all those people until such time as we know that money is guaranteed to do that,
Mhm.
right? So I am a big fan. Maybe I don't know if when you think about hiring or financing your talent pipeline, my tendency tends to be let's get everybody to run hot for as long as we can, but do not hire ahead of expected or projected revenue. Like I just think that's a recipe to go bankrupt.
Yes. And I've worked with some agencies who've hired ahead, or sometimes they approach me as prospective clients, and sometimes it works,
Right.
sometimes it doesn't. It really depends on your risk appetite. But
Right. You're betting on the potential of a thing happening, which is cool in aggregate. If you have lots and lots of deals in your pipeline, you start to be able to project over time. It's like, well, I don't know which ones will close, but I know there's enough that some portion of expected value will happen. But you
right.
need a large enough sample size for that to happen. So if you're like a standard agency that has like 4 or 5 deals kind of, working through the pipeline, that's not a big enough sample size to be able to have projected value of that money. It could be zero or it could be all. And
Yeah.
that's a statistical probability problem that you need to pay attention to. And it takes a lot of data to even be able to project that. Most of us in agency land don't have that much data. So,
That makes sense. And one solution is, what I would describe as always be recruiting, a proactive approach to recruiting,
right.
which is, some agencies will have, future opening account manager or, blah, blah, blah. kind of thing, kind of a rolling application. And they make clear this is not for a specific role. This is if you're interested, get in the database, we'll keep you on file in a real way, not just we'll keep you on file.
Yeah, and I hope that as you're developing that pipeline that you are the type of person who communicates with them, who isn't stringing people out and pretending there's going to be a job. It's like these are humans also, and they need jobs, right? So
Yeah.
you can't make them feel like they're going to get something when they're not. So
Mhm.
there's pipeline management for hiring, I think, is a real opportunity for brand touch points that sometimes folks miss ahead
Uh,
of time. So yeah.
Absolutely. Either to do it well, or I mean, a lot of companies do it poorly.
Right.
But certainly, I think for anyone who's listening, whether live or on the recording, you probably want to do it well. So, we've
Agreed.
sharing an article about agency models. The traditional agency model we could think of as a full stack agency. You're doing the client facing work and you're doing the fulfillment. There's a trend for years. There have always been what I would call back end agencies, white label firms doing work where other agencies are handling the clients. Another model would be what I'd call the front end agency. That is where you're providing all the client facing work, sales, marketing, account management, strategy, and so on. But then you're outsourcing the fulfillment to another agency. That can help you scale up faster, but
It does, yeah. In fact, because of the problems that I saw doing these big logo deals, my two agencies are back end agencies. So,
there we go. And of course, the key with that is if someone is running a front end agency, they need to find the right back end agency
yes,
partners. I found often for clients who love the partners they work with, they went through a few before they found the one that's the right match. So
it's just like booking humans. They're just humans, and everybody says the same promises, and it's hard. Finding vendors is one of those big things. And this is again not the thing that you would do sort of off the cuff once you realize that you have now booked a big logo client and you can't deliver on it
mhm.
because then your back's against the wall and you make snowballing bad decisions that are even more costly, right? So this is where planning ahead for
Yeah,
this disposition, I think, is the biggest thing. Like, don't just wait until this, Meta walks in the door
right.
and everybody freaks out and goes, "This is amazing! Like, we just tripled our agency," and then you kind of, whoa, we need to actually do this thing,
Yeah.
So don't get disconnected in that way. So,
I mean, I think some of that too for people listening, if you think about your personality as an agency leader, I think of a continuum as people being a starter or a finisher. Starter is great at getting things going. That could be doing sales, could be recruiting, could be getting the team excited about a new initiative. And that's great, but you also need someone following behind you who's the finisher, who's, putting together all the pieces to turn your inspiration into action. And if you're listening and you are the finisher and you're making it happen, hopefully your colleagues respect and value the work you're doing because big ideas are great. They're not
right.
so great if you can't implement them.
That is 100% on point. The I would call those the operators, those folks who are in charge of the delivery and reporting and the showing results and the blocking and tackling. I think some books call those the integrators or what have you. But that role is really what'll save the day. And if you are both the starter and finisher and you don't have sort of that team around you, I would be very reticent to take on a large deal until you had that plugged.
Makes sense. It really helps to have a strong number two in place
Mhm.
to help turn your vision into reality. So, looking ahead a bit, let's say you've landed the big logo clients. You part of it is that you want to be able to talk about them.
Right.
Now, some don't want to. I had a client in California where they were working with Apple, and they
Yep.
could care about Apple as a client in one-on-one sales conversations, but Apple was like, absolutely not going on the
No go.
website.
Yeah.
How do you navigate getting client permissions slash testimonials? Like what are your tips
Yes.
on that?
So the first thing is whoever is the tip of the spear in negotiating that deal in the sales seat or what have you. you're going to be presented with their master service agreement, right? You're almost never going to get your own paperwork through to a big company. They're going to use theirs, which means you need to be in the business of reviewing those things. In almost every case, there's going to be a section related to something about publicity or mark usage or whatever that is. And usually the default in there is going to say you can't do that. Sometimes they'll say you can do it, but with written permission. Um, so in an instance, so I had the largest healthcare company in the world, which will remain nameless, but they wanted us not only to say we'll never talk about you, and there's a non-compete in there. You can't work with any other healthcare companies. So we walked away from the deal because that's not a good thing,
Mm.
going forward, for that client. But that you need to be ready to say no to them. And so when that logo thing comes up, you need to tell them, like, that needs to be part of your red lines. I want this. I want to use this logo. Here's how I want to use it. And I want to understand exactly how and from whom to get that written permission once you're happy.
That makes sense. I mean, you raised an important piece around stakeholders. Small. If we're looking at small versus big clients, as you mentioned, the big logos aren't always enterprise, but often are. Uh, you know, enterprise clients aren't just big, small clients. You might have smaller clients where there may be 1 to 3 stakeholders. Enterprise
Yeah.
clients could have 20 stakeholders, and you don't always know who they are. People will pop up at the last minute and share feedback, and the technical term for that is a swoop and poop. They come in and do a
Yes.
swoop and poop.
Seagull management. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it sounds like one of your points is negotiate up front about the references. I know Matchstick Legal has talked about variable pricing, where if they aren't going to let you share, then they're going to have to pay more money. Obviously, that doesn't help if the point is as a big logo. On the other hand, if they're paying enough, maybe it's worth it.
You could try to lever that. More often than not, I find the budget approval process kind of exists differently than the legal approval in most of these cases. So what I will typically try to do is get my champion, who is, I don't know, a VP of marketing, something, something.
Yeah,
Who is your contact on legal? Like, I know you keep sending this paperwork into the ether and it comes back
yeah,
with a bunch of red lines on it. Is it possible to have a call with that person and talk through the contingencies?
yes,
So I'll try to do that, like have an actual call with them. The most interesting thing is how many people I've sold to in corporate who, are sort of the decision maker, quote unquote, and who
yeah,
have never bought anything from an external vendor and have absolutely no idea how to do so. Like they just think when they say yes, it'll work. And I don't know, there's a that's so right at the beginning of that process, we're wanting to know in parallel, what is the paperwork process here? How does procurement work? Are you allowed to bring on a vendor? What are your limited budget expenditures? Like up to 10,000 a quarter can go on your credit card? Cool. Let's look at that.
yeah.
But like they don't know those things. And it's very often like, all right, let's go. And it's like, you didn't give me the things, and it's going to take 90 days of paperwork back and forth to get you there.
Right.
Right. So always start that early. Just say, I know this is going to be the case. So you don't even need to choose me, but let's get me set up as a vendor in the meantime, which is
Yeah.
also a really great thing because if you get approved as a vendor, you're in their internal procurement database and you might get a call later.
Exactly. Everything's smoother. I mean, thinking ahead on the, we talk about procurement, we talk about other things, but yeah, on the direct getting paid part, I worked with a large university that's, and usually on the various top 10 lists. We got in as a preferred vendor. I went through that whole process. And at one point we were working with 2 different departments. And one department was like, oh, we're working on getting it paid. I don't know, it was various excuses. With the other department, when the contact heard that we had not been paid on time, she basically went after her finance contact and like yelled at them. I don't know if she actually yelled at them, was basically like, why haven't
Right.
you paid them? They've done the work. get your act together. That was someone who had a lot more political capital and awareness of how their organization worked versus the first one.
Yeah,
Um,
so that's really important. Understand their power to get through the bureaucracy. And so a lot of times what you'll see is it's like somebody new came to this big corporation and they're trying to restock their vendor pool. We're going to do new things here, but they
yeah.
actually have no idea how to do that. And so they don't have the contacts.
Yes. I mean, there's the idea when a new CMO or CEO starts, there's the joke they have three jobs to do: hire someone, fire someone, or rearrange the furniture. But they're trying to show they're getting things done. Maybe they
They don't
join.
have the ability then to roll through that. So
I think we had a bit of an audio blip there. Yeah.
it's good.
So, a final question before, as we're wrapping up, and we have a discount for everyone listening that you've graciously created. Are there any other things that agencies should be thinking about to prepare for big logo clients?
I think the biggest thing is on touch points. So you really want to think about the idea of how am I presenting each and every meeting, each and every touch point? How am I demonstrating ROI? It's like your direct buyer isn't the same person as like usually your direct buyer goes into the next quarterly budget meeting to somebody you never even met. And so what you're really thinking about there is like you get to this level of delivery, you're trying to climb the ladder with excellence of delivery of services and documentation and proof. And your people will probably tell you, like, see this in marketing all the time. It's like, we're not interested in, real KPIs. We're just trying to build our brand.
Yeah.
I guarantee you that the person who paid for that you haven't even met, they care
Yes.
about ROI, right? So I want you to think ahead of to whom this is going to be presented to get the next upsell, because otherwise it's going to be a once and done. And what I like to see is a land and expand type of mindset. That once we get in, we're staying in, which means you need multiple contacts, grow
Well,
that
contact
reputation.
relationships, and I mean, this is why it's important for owners to delegate day-to-day account management so that
Yes.
the owner can come in as the account director, or if you have an account director above that, to build those more executive level relationships rather than day-to-day. Day-to-day is great. You don't want to piss them off. That creates
Right.
problems, but working your way up and sort of across and out of the organization pays off.
Right. So
So,
we did launch a course of this. I
yeah,
spent a year
let's talk.
writing it. Really took just thousands and thousands of calls and experience and took far too long to write it all down. It's a lot of work, but it is called Big Logo Deals. And I'm giving $1,000 off to anybody who wants to jump in there. Got the nice Sakas code to go with it.
Yes.
And we're rolling that thing out. I'd love to get the feedback. I want to build a big, sort of community around it. I want to make it better. So I'm interested in anybody that's interested in this topic. Just want to be your resource. So,
Awesome. And we've shared a link if you're joining live in chat, the SACUS 1000 code, as well as a link to where to find things. I have not been through the whole course yet myself, but from my
you
looking,
didn't finish it yet?
behind the scenes preview, when I logged in, I'm like, wow, this is impressive.
It's a lot.
There-
Yeah.
there's a lot, but it's organized very well, right? So kind of chunk by chunk, and you can go
I
through.
really thought values based with this. It's like, well, how are we really going to make an organization that can succeed
Yes.
this way? And it's so there's so much material about close these deals.
Yeah.
Let's just close a deal, and it's just like that's not the point.
Exactly. Well, Ledge, thank you so much for joining. If people want to get in touch, how can they find you? I know we've shared your LinkedIn and chat and anything else.
LinkedIn's great. Yeah, please shoot me anything. I love talking to agency owners. It's my favorite space. So,
Awesome. Ledge, thank you so much for joining as our guest today. Appreciate it.
Carl, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, coming up, we have a question from Stuart and then a question from John. But first, I want to share a heads up related to benchmarking your agency. When you run your agency, you sometimes wonder, what is everyone else doing? What are other people up to? And how does your agency compare? Well, wonder no more. I've partnered with Databox yet again on a research study. This particular study is looking at the state of agency client collaboration. It's a survey. You can complete it and you'll get aggregated instant results, preliminary instant results showing how your agency compares. I'll be working with Pete Caputa at Databox to present the full results in 2025 once we have all the results in, but you don't have to wait. You can get instant access as soon as you complete it. We've shared a link how to get there in chat and in the video and blog description. Check it out. It's designed to take, I think, 15, 20 minutes or so, so as I recall, to get it done. And um, you'll get those instant results immediately. All right. Well, next up, we have a question from Stuart. Let's go ahead and shift over there. Here we go. Stuart, welcome to Agency Office Hours.
I'm honored. Thanks, Carl. I love what you do, and it's fun to participate.
Thank you. Well, glad to have you here. So, let me paraphrase your question, then you can elaborate a bit on it, and then we'll get into to answering it. So you shared a question about exit planning. Specifically, how do you know when you were truly ready to let go and sell? If you could elaborate a bit on your question, and then we'll dig in.
Sure, I'd love to. And first of all, thanks, Carl, for having me again. Appreciate what you do. And Ledge, that was some awesome content. With Carl, there's so many times I go, gosh, I wish I'd have known all those things before I did the brutal hard way of doing it. So maybe
No,
this would be different. So yeah, no, a while back you were covering a lot about agency owners selling, and I thought, we've been just for the record, we're not for sale. I hear that a lot. But we've been getting a lot of calls. I think it's around 2016, maybe because we were at scale and our reputation was out there. Maybe because just the M&A started to heat up, but it's been, a pretty long period of time to the point where I have to tell my employees, don't worry, don't freak out when you see stuff because like this has been going on for a long time. So I feel like though it is a critical issue, and I look at it, and the question was as much for me, but also for listeners because I've got to imagine there's like a lot of stress there. For me, I still have a lot of energy. What's the right timing? What's the vision? What's going on with the marketplace, with AI? How much does it weigh in if somebody's tired or not, right?
mm,
'Cause that's a big difference. Are you prepared? You're emotionally ready. Like there's just a lot there. So I thought it was a meaty topic, and I would love to hear your feedbacks on it, feedback on that.
yeah,
There's a lot of variables there for
yeah.
sure.
Let's dig in on that. So to repeat, when you're running your agency, how do you know when it is time to sell the business? When and if? So the answer, of course, to that is going to be unique to everyone. Stuart, the answer for you is going to be different from the answer for someone else and things like that. But there are some frameworks we can use to help sort through that. And as people are others are listening on the live call or in the video, you might start thinking to yourself, how would you answer these questions or how would you approach this? My overarching question when I'm speaking with agency owners about their long-term plans is, does running an agency support your personal goals? If so, what needs to change so that the agency better supports you on the personal goals? And if not, if you realize, you know what, running the agency does not at all support your personal goals, it's probably time to sell sooner rather than later, rather than keep going. I remember an online dating profile a number of years ago where a potential match on her profile said that she was an accountant. She hates accounting. She works for an accounting firm, yet she is now studying for her CPA exam. And I'm thinking, well, if you want to be an accountant, being a CPA is great. I mean, like that's the pinnacle of within that profession. But if you don't like it, why are you digging in even more? That just seems like she was setting herself up for a miserable 20 years. Well paid, perhaps, but miserable. So, if you conclude that running the agency is contrary to your personal goals, probably want to prepare to sell sooner than later. But let's say you decide that running the agency does support your personal goals. Maybe it's not totally matching up. In that case, I'd focus on, what do you need to change to make it fit? Maybe, for instance, hypothetically, you're underpaid, so you pay yourself more. Or maybe you're stuck doing work you don't enjoy. Maybe it's time to figure out how to get other team members in to delegate that and things like that. Maybe you like doing sales closing and the consultative stuff, but you don't like doing the initial screening. Maybe you bring someone in as the initial screener. We have the article about sales delegation. So that's the starting point, right? Is the agency going to help you with your personal goals? Um, Next, and Stuart, any questions on that? You don't have to share the particulars on that, but any questions on that
No,
framework?
I think it's really interesting. I met an agency owner recently that's kind of a competitor, and it feels like he's burnt out. Like I'm wondering if that's serving. As you're sitting there talking about him, there's a lot of people in our niche being in healthcare. It's a pretty big vertical, but
Yeah.
I could see how somebody would just get burnt out, and it's like they never stop to say like, why am I doing this at all?
Yeah.
And that's a big deal for sure.
I mean, with that, one of the questions you raised was around, say if someone's tired or say if they're burned out, what to do. Um, it helps to get some time away from the business, usually through doing a planned sabbatical, which could be anywhere from a month to maybe a few months. If you can't do a month, maybe at least 2 weeks. It's more of a vacation than a sabbatical, but some time away. And we've shared an article in chat and in the description on preparing for extended leave. That includes doing a stress test. So, like, go away for a few days and see what breaks. Go away for a week, see what breaks. Maybe go away for a couple weeks before you
That's a
take.
great idea. That's an awesome idea.
And in the article, I talk about, if you can't do a formal stress test, you could do a simulated or a virtual stress test where you're still working, but you're imagining as things come up, if you weren't there, who on your team could have handled it? Or you're like, oh, you know what? I don't have someone. I'll need to figure that out. Or does your team have the info they need to make the decisions, the values, goals, and resources involved? So for anyone who is near burnout, doing a sabbatical is a planned thing, doing it intentionally can be helpful in navigating that. I would recommend doing that before anyone just sells their agency. Because if you come back from the sabbatical and you're like, okay, I feel recharged again, let me try to figure this out, that's different from coming back from the sabbatical and you're like, I want to burn this to the ground. I don't recommend that solution. It's not perhaps the most lucrative solution. I mean, if you need to, so be it. But such as it is. So, um, yeah, good.
I actually have another question that might be certainly relevant because I could see this for me and for others is it's really easy as an agency owner to get their identity wrapped up into this. And so suddenly you're just like this, richer guy. My joke is you're some rich guy at Starbucks. It's like you're just a guy. Like, how do you to suggest people wrap their mind around that? Because that is real. If your identity is wrapped up in what you do. And I've met other agency owners that have sold, and that's been a real issue for them.
Yeah. I mean, that was a topic that came up to an extent in the Andrew Wilkinson book, Never Enough from Barista to Billionaire, around what do you do when you have so much money that money is no longer a problem. Now it gets into your identity and who you are and things like that. I talked a bit about that in the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit workshop around who are you when you are not the owner and CEO or president or what have you of an agency? And the answer to that is going to be unique. I will say, in my volunteering with the USO, the Military Connected Charity, a lot of the retirees that are fellow volunteers are, pretty busy themselves, right? They're throwing themselves into volunteering, potentially with family, things like that. So it helps to start imagining your ideal future. And what the idea there is that, what do you want to do after you exit? One of the exercises I talk about in the workshop and the training is around writing an advanced retrospective. And in particular, what is your ideal future day after the deal either has closed and maybe there's an earnout, or everything is totally done? For instance, on a recent trip, caught up with a past client who had bought out his business partner and was about to write a final check for the working capital adjustment, kind of post exit. In this case, the client I was meeting was now the full owner of the agency. And I mean that itself is a change to think through. But if I had been advising, say, his former business partner, I might have said, write an advanced retrospective about what it's like when you get that final check, that final payment. What are you doing? How are you spending your day? Who are the people you're interacting with? How are you spending your time? What are the decisions you're making? And it can be somewhat hard to imagine that if it's all in a vacuum. That's why it can help to talk to people who have sold and hear what their life is like. That was something I made a point of in the Control and Maximize Your Agency Exit workshop, where I was asking people who had sold, like, what are they doing? For instance, one of the panelists, Kalila Jones, talked about it enabled her to work on writing a book. It enabled travel. You can travel now, certainly as an agency owner, but even
Yeah.
more time. Mike Belasco, who's my co-presenter on the course, he now has way more time for skiing and fishing and things like that. So like think about what you love doing and maybe what you want to do if you had more time. And I will say sometimes people will use that as an excuse. Someone said, not Kalila, but someone had mentioned to me that, they're like, I really want to write a book, but I guess I need to like sell the business first. I've written four books while running the business. I just finished the manuscript for my fourth one, Calm the Chaos,
Yeah.
about leading your team with compassion and confidence and compassion. You can write a book while you run the business. It is hard, but it is possible. But I guess that's kind of like if you have kids, if you wait until they're out of the house to do everything, that could be a long wait.
Yeah.
So what's your reaction to that about visualizing your ideal future?
No, that's really helpful. I think that it's by the way, if you wait, then you're old, right? If you wait too long, it's like, wait, you missed the opportunity.
Yeah.
I'm interested, Carl, because one of the reasons why I sort of love your content and the stuff you do is just I always like the law of large numbers, right? You talk to a lot of other agency owners. I'm a sample size of one,
Yeah.
and I have some colleagues and friends I know that so okay, that raises the sample size to 10 or 12 or 15 or whatever.
Yeah.
But what I would say, you've always heard the stories about people on their deathbed say, God, I wish I would taken more risk.
Yeah.
Like, what would you say, like, from, experience, people that have exited, gosh, if I'd only known this, or geez, I should have done this, later or sooner, or like, there's got to be some life lessons you have from, hopefully they're not on the deathbed when they're doing this, but like, what are the lessons you've learned from working with so many people?
Yeah. I mean, one of the big ones is don't hold on to team members that you know are a poor fit for as long as people tend to do. And that can vary in different ways. But once you know a team member isn't a fit, and if you don't have another role that they'd be a match for, have that difficult conversation and part ways with them. I had that come up several years ago with a client where they had a head of operations. They'd been a strong match for a while, but the role they wanted to do was not what the agency needed at that point, not anymore. And there was an opportunity potentially for them to come back in several more years as the agency grew and then needed the new role they wanted, but they weren't going to need it for a few years. And so my
No,
advice was have a candid conversation with them and help them find a new job. And the idea was that way they'd leave on good terms and then potentially come back. Unfortunately, I was coaching one one of the partners and their business partner disagreed on counseling out the team member, and so they just sort of let things drag on for like a year. And unfortunately, the employee felt increasingly frustrated and did not leave under good terms and not under terms where they would ever ever want to come back. So, and that was a little bit different where it wasn't directly a toxic employee, but the role wasn't that they wanted wasn't what the agency needed anymore. Um, but yeah, so don't hang on to people. I mean, the same thing on clients. I had a client in Canada say, we have a client who is making misogynist comments to members of the team. Can I fire him? And I'm like, yeah. I mean, it helped that that particular end client was relatively small from a revenue perspective. But, I think that was a case where my client felt like, ne needed permission to fire this toxic client. Like, you can't, if you are listening now, you have permission to fire that toxic client. I have an article about, when you keep toxic clients, the message you're sending to your team is this revenue is more important than your happiness. That's not
So,
a good message to send.
so I guess the last question I would have on this topic would
Yeah.
be,
Yeah.
again, just knowing people that have sold, a couple of them told me it's just going back maybe to the identity thing, but the depression. You would think somebody sitting on bags of money would be happy, but
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
it's a big life transition. So I think all the prep you just said was really, really helpful about getting clear on that. But any
Yeah.
other sort of like, I don't know if you find people say, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Or they're probably a mix, I'm guessing, like of like, "Oh, why did I wait so long?" Or "Oh my God, what have I done?" And how do
Yeah.
they cope with all that? Because it's like, maybe like for example, you've been waiting to write the big novel, you get into it for 2 weeks, you're like, "I hate writing
Mhm.
novels." I
Yeah.
really should have thought about that before I quit my job. Any other comments along those lines? You must have some pretty good stories, I'm guessing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so digging in, I mean, a couple of things there. Um, uh, to avoid regretting the exit, it helps to plan ahead for the exit early. In the panel in session two of the exit prep training, a couple of the panelists mentioned they wish they had started earlier so they knew what to expect in the process. One outcome of that, for instance, is that if your number isn't what you want the number to be, you can work on growing the valuation. I talk about that in session three in the training. So that when you sell, I mean, once you sell, if it's 100% sale, that number is it. There may be an amount down and an earnout or what have you, but you know, you're not going to magically make way more money than you negotiate at the deal. And so, if you get that final payment, you're like, huh, that's it? If you had started planning earlier and potentially worked to grow your valuation along the way, you might have been happier with that. But to go and to go back to the sense of satisfaction. I mean, clients do call me their agency therapist. I note I'm not an actual therapist. Benefit from having
Yeah,
one. That will be my new podcast, by the way, coming out. The podcast is going to be called Agency Therapy.
I
Uh,
love it.
yeah, yeah. Um, I mean, I think thinking across my clients, having lots of money really draws a lens in on anything else that isn't going smoothly in your life, whether that's relationships, health, other things. It's easy if you're aspiring to a big financial number, like anything that you're unhappy about in your life, it will magically be better once you reach that point. It probably won't. Um, I was listening to some commentary from musician Amy Mann, and one of the things she mentioned was this idea of the geographic fix or solution, which often shows up in addiction. The idea that if you move somewhere else, all of your problems will go away. But as she noted, when you move, you tend to bring most or all of the problems with you.
Right.
So I think working with a therapist who has experience with your particular situation is a great way to get help. And ideally start that before you sell rather than sell and suddenly realize there are some things that you might have done differently, but now you don't have the same runway.
Awesome. Thank you, Carl.
Absolutely. Well, Stuart, thank you so much for joining. This is a great question. I think it's something that's going to help everyone who's listening, and I'm really glad you brought it up. Thank you. All right. Well, our final question today is from John. John was not able to join live, so I'm going to answer the question in absentia. Here is the question that John asked. How can we grow our client count without breaking the agency? That is a great question because agencies tend to have a certain client count that they can handle comfortably. That'll depend on the agency. My general benchmark is ideally it's 10 to 20 active clients. Some agencies can get that up to 30, but it's hard to grow beyond 35 clients without things falling apart. And I do have clients that have 200 plus clients. It's challenging. It's not easy. But one of the solutions, if you're trying to grow your client count, I would say first, should you even do it? What are you trying to accomplish? I worked with an agency in Virginia almost 10 years ago at this point, and at one point they'd had 100 clients, and they were down to 80 clients, and the owner said, "I want to get back to over 100, maybe 120." And I was like, "Why?" He said, "Well, if we have more clients, we'll make more money." And I said, sometimes, but what if you could make more money with fewer clients? And he was like, how would that work? And I mentioned the example, thinking of sort of t-shirt sizes. Maybe you have the extra large client, you have several of those, you have the large client, you have some combination of medium clients, maybe fewer small clients. You could add a 2XL or a 3XL client, something like that. There are ways to grow your revenue and your profit margins without just adding lots of clients. And in that particular example, I discovered that one of his clients had cut their monthly spend. The accounting department updated their invoicing, but somehow the account managers never found out. And so the agency was delivering, according to my calculations, for 2 months at the equivalent of $5 an hour, less than minimum wage. Not good. And part of it was they had just so many clients. Now, if you want to grow in part by adding new clients, one thing to consider is exploring a pod structure. A pod structure is effectively having agencies within the agency. They're going to be self-contained for the most part. You'll have someone leading the pod. They could be an account strategist, or if you're a more technically oriented agency, that might be a project manager, someone who's in charge, the client-facing person, and they're also coordinating the internal team. And then other members of the team, the pod could be 3 to 6 people typically, and the roles will depend on the services your agency provides. So maybe, for instance, there's a designer, maybe there's a developer, maybe if you're more technically oriented, you might have back-end developers and front-end developers. Kind of depends on what you're doing. But the idea is that they're a self-contained team working on a subset of clients. Could be working on a few clients. They could be, if you've got a really big client, they could work on just one client at a time. Maybe you have a pod that handles all of your maintenance clients, or maybe, there are 50 different clients that they're serving, but they only hear from, a few of them at a time, something like that. And I write more about this in my new article about creating a pod structure at your agency. There are a lot of considerations to keep in mind. There are also some downsides. For instance, how do you decide which roles work across pods rather than being in a pod? What do you do about load balancing? For instance, if one pod suddenly has a ton of work and another has not a lot, what do you do? How do you decide where to assign new clients to which pod? And what are the roles that should be in the pod and things like that. There are a lot of benefits or also some downsides, but if the goal is to grow in part by working with more and more clients, I strongly encourage you to consider and explore the pod approach to sort that out as a potential way to make that happen. But I would also recommend getting some help, whether that's with me or someone else. Uh, Perhaps starting off with a bite-sized action path call to kind of run through the situation, and then we could always dig deeper with an agency growth diagnostic and then potentially a follow-up on team structure. Up to you, but start by reading the article and decide if the pod structure is right for you, given the pros and the cons. All right. Well, this wraps up agency office hours for November 2024. If you join us live, you'll get the recording within 24 hours. Here's a preview of what is coming up next in the next agency office hours. Our next session will be in December with our special guest, Jenny Plant, talking about account management. If you're watching the recording, this may be available now. Check it out on YouTube and the Sakes and Company site. If you have a question that you'd like me to answer at a future office hours, include that when you RSVP. Kate and I from the team will let you know if you're on the list, and look forward to answering your question. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Karl Sakas here at Sakas and Company. Thank you, and good luck out there.